Belgium. December 1944. The wind tore the blizzard apart, snow hissing against steel like shrapnel. I gripped the wheel of my Studebaker US-6, 60 barrels of aviation fuel rattling behind me like a ticking clock. The cab reeked of gasoline and frost. The compass spun. The radio was dead. The map had dissolved into pulp hours ago, its ink bleeding into the lies of command. Somewhere ahead, through the white blur, a flicker of orange. Fire, or a trap. The engine coughed once, a heartbeat in metal. I whispered into the storm. God, how did I end up here? No answer, only the hum of the motor and the whisper of snow scraping past the glass. Ardennes, December 17, 1944. By morning the forest sounded hollow, as if the cold had eaten the echoes. Headquarters claimed the front was stable. The word hung on the tongue like a lie. My orders were typed, stamped, and clean: no solo movements, maintain radio silence, follow marked routes only. In the margin, someone had penciled a neat reminder: conserve fuel. I had 60 drums of 100/130 avgas chained in the bed of my Studebaker US-6, a rolling fire I was supposed to shepherd along blue lines on a map that no longer existed. On paper, order. On the ground, broken teeth. Bridges were gone. Some dropped by demolition charges, some folded under ice. Road signs had become white humps beneath the snow, their arrows buried with the week's promises. Military police who once waved convoys through crossroads had vanished into the blizzard, leaving only drifted footprints and a toppled lantern. The compass card spun lazy circles as if the earth had forgotten where north lived. The radio muttered static like a sick man, then went silent for good. I passed hulks that looked like sleeping animals, half-tracks rimed with frost, a jeep nose down in a ditch, its canvas stiff as tin, a tanker scorched to the frame, drums burst open like cracked ribs. Somewhere to my east, a column of German armor was pushing through our thin lines. I didn't need a report to feel it. The air had that tautness it gets before metal meets metal. The rulebook said wait for escort. Wait for a plow. Wait for confirmation. It also said our armor had fuel. I had stood beside 3 Shermans the night before and listened to their engines fail to turn over, batteries starving in the cold. Crews burned ration boxes under oil pans, warming them like old dogs. The log read, supplies delivered. The men said otherwise with their eyes. I was a mechanic before I wore a stripe. I trusted gauges more than speeches. The US-6's 320 cubic inch engine liked to tell me things, the note shifting when the fan belt slipped on ice, the small complaint in 4th gear that meant a rear spring had a hairline crack, the clean pull when the carburetor found the right breath despite air that could flay you. That morning the motor's tone said keep moving or freeze where you stand. Marked routes only. There were no marks left. I tried them anyway, route red, then green, felt the chains bite, listened to the drums clatter against the steel stanchions, counted telephone poles to guess distance because the odometer had iced over. At a stream the map called a fordable trickle, a Bailey bridge was supposed to be waiting. What waited was black water and 2 mangled panels of truss pressed against a bend like weeds. IK** led the engine and stepped down into snow that came over my ankles and swallowed sound. Somewhere far off a 105 barked, then another, then the muffled thud of something big landing in wet pine. The storm made distance meaningless. It could have been a mile. It could have been the next field. Fuel. Heat. Movement. Those were the truths. We had none to waste. Orders multiplied in warm rooms. Out here every decision had one digit, 0 or 1. Stop or go. Live or freeze. I climbed back into the cab, rubbed the windshield with a wool glove, and watched my breath drift like smoke. Headquarters could keep its perfect sentences. I had 60 drums, a dead radio, and a road that refused to exist. The paper war and the real one no longer matched, and men I'd never meet were waiting for what I carried. Before the war, I fixed things. Engines, mostly. Farm trucks, streetcars, anything that coughed instead of breathed. Cleveland, 1938, the air always smelled faintly of oil and river smoke. My shop was a narrow concrete bay tucked behind a bakery. I could tell a carburetor's mood by sound, the same way some men read faces. The sign above the door was a scrap of pine I burned with a soldering iron myself. If it won't move, make it think, not break. Customers laughed at that. But machines do think, in their own way. They stall when they're scared, they overheat when you rush them, and they forgive you only if you listen first. Helen, my wife, used to say that was the reason we got along. I treated people like machines and machines like people. Maybe she was right. She wrote to me every week after I shipped out in '42. Her letters were folded like blueprints, neat, exact, small squares of handwriting that smelled faintly of soap. I kept one in my pocket all through France. It read, "Remember, Tom. Machines can be fixed. People can't." Every time I reached for a wrench, I felt the edge of that paper. Every time a sergeant barked an order that made no sense, I touched it again, a quiet reminder of where sense still lived. Back then, before Europe, I thought logic could hold the world together. In the shop, it usually did. You turned the bolt clockwise, the thread obeyed. Cause and effect. Order and repair. But war doesn't have threads, it has seams that rip faster than you can stitch. Training was easy compared to belief. The army taught me to strip down a 6x truck blindfolded, to recite torque specs, to memorize convoy codes that changed every 48 hours. But no one explained the gap between instruction and survival, that space where you either improvised or froze. When I first saw the Studebaker US-6, it looked like something I'd have loved to work on back home. Straight 6 Hercules engine, 5-speed gearbox, dual-axle drive. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. You gave it fuel and patience, and it would crawl up a mountain. By '44 I'd driven it across half of France, hauling everything from mortar shells to field rations. Somewhere along the line it stopped being a truck and started being company. The men at the depots joked that I talked to it like a dog. Maybe I did. In winter, it answered with the soft tick of cooling metal, in summer, with the long exhale of the radiator after a hard climb. We understood each other. Orders came and went, generals rotated, supply routes shifted, but that truck and I stayed constant. I wasn't a hero. I was grease under the war's fingernails. My world was bolts, gauges, and fuel manifests that never matched reality. When a tank ran dry on the line, it wasn't an abstract failure, it was a name on a casualty list. Every engine that didn't start meant another man walking into the snow without cover. You start to see the front not as lines on a map but as a network of starving lungs, each one needing air, fuel, or faith to keep breathing. Sometimes I wondered what Helen would have thought if she'd seen me there, sleeves frozen stiff, a wrench fused to my glove, frost creeping across the instrument panel like ivy. She used to tease me that I'd rather fix things than talk about them. She was right again. Out there, words broke faster than metal. By December I'd stopped expecting the war to make sense. But I still believed in repair. That was the only religion I had left, that anything built by hands could be saved by hands. So when the officers shouted that we were winning, I listened instead to what the engine said. They were quieter, but they told the truth. They coughed. They stalled. They pleaded. And I knew, if I could keep them alive a little longer, maybe the men riding them would stay alive too. That was who I was before the storm, a mechanic with a conscience, carrying a folded letter and a faith in function, not victory. At the depot, the cracks showed first. They weren't in the trucks, not yet, they were in the paper. Maps that led to bridges that didn't exist, manifests signed by officers who'd never seen the mud. Every crate bore a neat stencil of destination codes, Bastogne, priority/fuel, class 3. On the logbook they were marked delivered. On the ground, the tanks they were meant for sat dead in the frost, engines frozen, men huddled inside for warmth. I stood beside the dispatch tent one evening, snow hissing against the canvas, and watched a lieutenant stamp, complete, on a delivery form without lifting his head. His gloves were clean. The ink froze to the rubber. "Get those next loads rolling east, Sergeant," he said. "Sir, those roads are under fire." "Not according to this." He tapped the paper. The map behind him still showed bridges in blue ink that had been blown apart 3 days earlier. That was the system, a perfect engine running on fiction. Down the line, the motor pools were graveyards. Trucks sat axle deep in slush, canvas stiff as iron. Carburetors choked on bad fuel. Drivers tore up blankets to wrap leaking fuel lines. Every night a new convoy was ordered forward, every morning another came back half-empty or didn't come back at all. Yet the report stayed immaculate, columns of numbers that looked like progress. When I suggested rerouting through the logging trails north of St. Vith, a supply sergeant barked, "Follow the order, not your gut. Thinking's not your job, Garvey." I nodded, because that's what you do. But inside, something slipped a gear. I'd spent my life trusting procedure, the way torque charts and timing marks never lied. Now I was watching men die of obedience. A platoon of tankers bivouacked 2 miles from the depot had burned rations to stay warm. Their engines sat idle, dry as bone. When I walked among them that night, one corporal looked up and asked, "Fuel's coming tomorrow, right?" I couldn't answer. The order said it had already arrived. Back in the shop tent, we worked by lanterns that bled smoke. I remember the smell: diesel, wet wool, solder flux. Private Ellis was patching a radiator with bar solder. Every time he lifted the iron, sparks hissed through the cold air like angry bees. The brass patch looked good, but I knew it wouldn't hold in weather like this. Nothing held. A colonel from Division Logistics toured the yard the next morning. He moved quick, boots barely touching the ground, his aide taking notes. "Morale seems high," he said. We stood at attention, pretending not to notice the fuel drums half filled with melted snow, the trucks cannibalized for parts. When he left, one of the drivers spat in the snow and said, "Guess we're winning." That night the wind came in hard from the east. I sat in the cab of my Studebaker, listening to the frost tighten around the bolts. The gauges twitched like nervous eyes. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once, then nothing but the creak of trees under ice. I wrote a line in my notebook: "If the system lies, the engine tells the truth." The next day we lost another bridge. Order said continue on schedule Route B. I watched the remains of that bridge collapse into black water at dawn. We rerouted ourselves, unofficially, through a farmer's field. The snow there was so deep the axles scraped. When we reached the other side, a new message came through the field phone: "Unauthorized deviation from convoy path, disciplinary review pending." It didn't matter. The fuel reached the line. The tank started. For 12 hours, the battle held. I learned something that day. Obedience kept the books clean, defiance kept men breathing. Each mile forward was another quiet argument between paper and mud. When I returned that night, the depot clerk asked if I'd filled out the incident form. I told him I had. I hadn't. I just wrote one sentence in my log: "Road impassable, cargo delivered." No one questioned it. Paper, after all, accepts anything you write on it. But the engines don't lie. They never did. The storm came like judgment. No thunder, no lightning, just a wall of white swallowing everything in its path. The convoy ahead of me vanished one truck at a time, tail lights dissolving into snow until only the hiss of wind remained. I leaned forward, forehead against frozen glass, hands locked on the wheel. The Studebaker's wipers thumped in a rhythm that matched my pulse. Somewhere behind me, 60 drums of aviation fuel shifted with each rut, metal on metal, a chorus of restrained disaster. Then came the sound that never leaves a man. A single whistling note, thin and rising. Shell. The first explosion lifted the road itself. Dirt and ice rained against the windshield. I slammed the brake, but the second blast threw the truck sideways, the cargo chain screaming. Fire bloomed where the convoy had been, a line of trucks, each one erupting in orange bursts until the forest glowed like dawn. One by one they went up, and the road became an inferno. When the smoke thinned, I realized mine was the only truck left. The rest were burning or gone, silhouettes twisted against flame. The radio hissed static. The compass spun without direction. I climbed out into snow hot with cinders, heat meeting cold in violent clouds of steam. The air stank of gasoline and pine sap. Somewhere beyond the ridge, faint but unmistakable, came the heavy roll of tank engines, German, moving west. I checked the road ahead. Gone. The map had promised a straight line through to Bastogne. Instead, the forest had swallowed it. I tore the soaked paper from the dash and let it drift into the snow. For a moment I stood there, the storm pushing against my chest, wondering if the sane thing was to wait. Maybe command would send someone. Maybe they'd even remember I existed. But then I pictured what waited beyond the next ridge, an engineer company stranded with 3 empty Shermans, trying to hold a bridge with nothing but rifles and courage. I'd fueled those same tanks 2 days earlier. I knew their serials, their drivers. I knew their faces. Helen's letter was still in my pocket. Machines can be fixed. People can't. I touched the paper through the fabric, feeling the outline of her handwriting as if it could guide me better than a compass. Stopping meant death, not necessarily mine, dozens of others. I climbed back into the cab. The steering wheel burned cold. The windshield was spidered with cracks from the blast, but the engine turned when I asked. Hercules JXD straight 6, 320 cubic inches of stubborn American iron. It coughed, growled, then caught. I patched the radiator with the only thing I had, my belt and a tin of hot water from the canteen. Steam rose, smelled faintly of leather and desperation. Regulations forbade using drinking water for maintenance. Regulations had already burned with the convoy. The forest ahead was unmarked on any map. No tire tracks, no signposts, just a corridor of snow between black trees. I shifted into first gear and let instinct drive. The headlights caught nothing but flakes. For hours, maybe minutes, time lost meaning, I crawled forward. The truck's engine sang a low, steady note, the kind you hear through bone. Every branch overhead felt like a hand reaching down to test my resolve. Twice I nearly turned back. The third time, I saw it, a faint yellow flicker in the distance. Fire. I braked hard, heart hammering. Could have been survivors from the convoy. Could have been Germans waiting for scavengers. IK** led the lights and coasted closer. The glow pulsed behind a curtain of trees, too regular to be random. Then I saw the bridge, or what was left of it. Half-collapsed, ice-coated beams jutting from a stream like broken ribs. The map had called it operational. Another lie. I sat there, engine idling, breath fogging the cab. The fuel drums rattled softly, impatient. On the far bank, through the drifting smoke, I thought I saw movement, shapes of men, dark against the snow. American helmets. Waiting. God help us, I murmured. We're all that's left. I pulled the brake, stepped out, and began to plan. Because if there was no bridge, I would build one. And if there was no road, I'd drive through the river itself. The blizzard didn't care. The rules didn't matter. Only the cargo did. Rules are for calm weather. Out here, rules froze like everything else. I looked at the bridge, the 2 main girders bent down into the current, planks twisted like ribs, and did the math in my head. Span, 22 feet. Water depth, maybe 3. Current fast enough to K**LL an engine if you stalled midstream. Weight of the Studebaker loaded with 60 drums, close to 8 tons. The book said impassable. But the book had been written in August, somewhere with dry roads and coffee. I worked by touch. First, I unbuckled the belt from my waist, thick cowhide, cracked from years of use, and cinched it around the radiator's split hose. Then I boiled water over a can of burning fuel-soaked rags and poured it through the cap, praying the seal held. Steam burst out like breath from a wounded horse. It held. I remembered the depot sergeant's voice, no field repairs without authorization. I also remembered the charred road behind me. The headlights cut through snow in long, trembling cones. I drove off the official path and into the trees, following nothing but a gut feeling and the faint outline of a logging track half buried under drifts. Branches scraped the sides, the sound of fingernails on steel. Every few yards I stopped to knock ice off the intake grill with a wrench. 3 miles in, the track opened onto the river again. The bridge here had once been a pontoon, German, by the look of the fittings, now half sunk, its metal ribs sticking out like bones. I waded in, boots cracking the ice. The water came up to my knees, biting cold enough to make me gasp. But the structure beneath felt solid enough for a gamble. I went back for tools, an axe, a coil of rope, 2 spare tire chains. Then I started building. The logs came from a fallen pine, the rope, from a tarpaulin tie-down. I used the axe like a saw, the hammer like a prayer. The snow turned pink where my knuckles split. Every 30 seconds I'd glance at the tree lean, half expecting a muzzle flash. None came. Only the forest watching, patient. By midnight, I had a makeshift causeway, timbers lashed between the remaining pontoons, gaps filled with brush and frozen slush. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't safe. But it might hold one crossing. I walked back to the truck and climbed into the cab. My hands shook as I turned the ignition. The Hercules engine coughed once, twice, then roared awake, steady as a heart refusing to quit. The temperature gauge climbed to just above freezing, good enough. I eased forward. The first tire touched the bridge and groaned. The wood flexed but didn't break. Halfway across, water licked at the hubs. The drums and back shifted, metal on metal. I gritted my teeth and kept the throttle even. Too much power and I'd spin, too little and I'd sink. The truck swayed, bridge creaking beneath like an animal in pain. I felt the current grab at the tires, dragging sideways. The rear axle slid, caught, then found purchase again. The sound was pure agony, wood splitting, metal crying, but we moved. Inch by inch. When the front wheels found earth again, I didn't stop. Not until I was clear of the river and the wheels hit solid ground. Then IK** led the engine, stepped out, and listened. The bridge gave one last groan and collapsed behind me, folding into the dark water. For a long time I just stood there, breathing steam, staring at the place where I'd been. On this side, the air smelled different, smoke and oil, not frost. The horizon pulsed faintly orange. Fire. Combat. American. I had crossed into the wrong side of the war. Ahead lay a ridge, low and ragged, the kind that hides both friend and enemy. I climbed back into the Studebaker, shifted into gear, and started toward it. Regulation said I should have turned back, reported the loss of the convoy, awaited retrieval. But regulations had been written by men who had never seen a tank freeze to death. The snow thickened again, closing behind me like a curtain. The engine hummed, warm and alive. Every rotation of the tires was a small defiance, a reminder that movement itself was victory. Somewhere out there, beyond the ridge, someone was waiting for the fuel that would keep them fighting. And I was the only one left to bring it. Over the ridge I found them, shapes crouched in the snow like animals refusing to die. An engineer platoon, faces gray with cold, and 3M4A3 Shermans silent as barns after harvest. Their breath hung in the air. Their fuel caps were bare metal, frost-burnished. Someone had scrawled on a turret with a glove, dry. I rolled to a stop in the lee of a hedgerow. No salutes, no questions. Just work. Garvey, I said. Fuel. That was enough. 2 men brought me hose, canvas reinforced, stiff as bone. I cracked the drum bungs with a pry bar, hands slipping, knuckles raw. 100/130 octane, winter thick and mean. It breathed up at us, sweet, toxic, a summer smell in a December world. Gravity would do. I chalked the rear tires, climbed the stanchions, and tipped the first drum onto a plank cradle. The funnel was a cut-down jerrycan with its throat sawn wider. Field engineering. The gasoline hit the tin with a hollow glug that sounded like time returning. We bled 40 gallons to the first tank, 40 to the second, 30 to the third. Not full, but life. A shell arrived without ceremony, just a blunt concussion and a rain of ice. Another fell 30 yards short, kicking up a fan of snow and soil. Voices flattened. The engineers scattered to their tools on reflex, then remembered there was nothing to fix but the future. We need cover, someone said. I looked at the Studebaker, then at the narrow road that funneled down from the tree lean. The enemy would come that way, single file, confident. The truck still held more fuel than any order had a right to move. I climbed into the cab and turned the wheel hard, slewing the front axle until the nose faced the ditch. Shift, feather, throttle, let the weight do it. The US-6 slewed broadside and blocked the lane like a gate. Back away, I told them. Far. I ran a line from the manifold tap to the ground and cracked the petcock. Gas dripped, then streamed. I laid a trail under the chassis, across the shallow rut of the road, into a churned patch of snow. The liquid soaked and vanished, but its breath lingered. The third shell found our nerves. It tore a spruce in half and dropped it like a club. I struck a match behind the wheel well, wind cupped in my hands. The first died. The second lived. Flame crawled along the wet line with the patience of arithmetic, then found its sum. The truck lit, quietly at first, a low blue tongue under the sump, then with a heavy hump as the soaked snow flashed to steam and the cargo bed became a kiln door. Heat took the storm apart. Snow turned to rain, then to needles. The wall of fire climbed into itself and stayed there, a breathing shape across the road. The hedgerow crackled like old paper. Behind it, the Shermans coughed, caught, and settled into that animal idyll I had missed, 4 GAA V8s, deep and even. The sound steadied hands. "Button up," I said. "Use the glare." They did. The tanks moved behind the blaze, silhouettes dissolving and reappearing as if surfacing from a black sea. The first German forms resolved through the flame shimmer, half-tracks nosing cautious, infantry hunched against the wind. They hesitated, confused by the sudden summer in winter. The Sherman spoke. 75s barked flat and final. Tracers stitched low, sparks skipping off ice like skittering insects. A round struck the Studebaker square and shook loose a roar from its ribs, the bed spat pieces into the night. Another found the engine block and turned it into shrapnel. The badge on the grill, Studebaker's winged S, twisted, caught fire, and glowed like a small red planet. The Germans tried to push through the light and found a furnace instead. Their rounds went high, dazzled, their footing went bad in the meltwater. A half-track slewed sideways and blocked the lane. The Shermans advanced 2 lengths, fired, backed, advanced again, discipline on a metronome. I lay flat behind a culvert piling, cheek in slush, counting the rhythm like a mechanic listening for knocks. Someone dragged me by my collar farther from the heat. "Sergeant, out of there." I let them, because my job was done. My truck was a wall now, and walls don't argue. The fire held. The bridge held. The line held. And behind the burning gate, our tanks K** led by the book, angle, range, correction, until the enemy's courage cooled in the wet orange light and slid back into the trees. When dawn came, the sky was gray enough to make you forget color ever existed. Smoke drifted flat across the river valley, slow as breath from a dying furnace. I was half buried in a snowbank, jacket stiff with ice, ears ringing from hours of concussions. For a moment I thought I was deaf until I heard the faint ticking of cooling metal. They found me there, an engineer corporal and a medic wrapped in soot and disbelief. "He's alive," one of them said, like it was an accusation. They hauled me up and gave me a canteen. The water was warm, tasted of fuel. Where the Studebaker had stood was now a skeletal frame, black against white. The drums had ruptured, leaving cratered hollows glazed in soot. All that survived intact was the front grille emblem, twisted, half-melted, the S of Studebaker warped into something that looked almost like a lightning bolt. I pulled it free and held it a long time, the edges burning my gloves. A captain appeared through the haze, collar turned up, notebook already open. His face was pale with exhaustion and something like gratitude buried under protocol. "Sergeant Garvey," he said. "You broke 3 direct orders." "Yes, sir." "You crossed an unverified sector alone." "Yes, sir." "You destroyed government property." "Several tons of it, sir." He studied the wreck for a moment, pen poised but still. 2 battalions are still breathing because of that fuel, he said quietly. We had nothing left between them and the river. That wall of fire bought 6 hours. Long enough for artillery to get through. He flipped a page, then wrote something short. When he tore the sheet out and handed it to me, I read only 4 words. Fuel delivered. Position held. No citation. No reprimand. Just fact, because fact was safer than truth. The report that reached headquarters 3 days later called it a navigational error resulting in accidental engagement of enemy forces. The brass liked that version, it implied control, not chaos. They needed neat stories to patch the maps. But the men who'd fought behind that burning truck knew better. They called it Garvey's Gate, or sometimes, the Fire Bridge. Names change, but fire doesn't care. We stayed there 2 more days, digging out the road, melting snow to refill the Sherman's radiators. The engineers joked that the air still smelled like leaded gasoline whenever the wind turned east. I didn't laugh. I sat by what was left of my truck and filed the badge smooth with a piece of emery, the way I used to polish carburetor plates. It felt like tending a grave. That night, while the others slept in their foxholes, I walked down to the riverbank. The water had frozen in sheets over twisted metal, trapping bubbles of flame beneath like amber. My reflection wavered there, smoke-streaked face, frost in the beard, eyes that didn't belong to the man who'd opened a repair shop once upon a Cleveland summer. I thought about Helen's letter. Machines can be fixed. People can't. She'd been right, but not in the way she meant. People do break, but sometimes they run on anyway, half-bent pistons in an engine that refuses to stop. When the relief convoy finally arrived, the officers walked the site like archaeologists. They measured craters, took photographs, debated whether the Germans had meant to shell the bridge or just stumbled into it. None of them looked me in the eye. That was fine. I wasn't looking for medals. The only thing I wanted was sleep, and maybe silence. As I climbed aboard a replacement truck, a newer model with fresh paint and the smell of factory wax, the driver nodded toward the wreck and said, "Hell of a thing you did there." "Wasn't a thing," I said. "Just work." We rolled out toward Bastogne, tires crunching over cinders. Behind us, the smoke thinned until it looked like an ordinary winter cloud. Ahead, the road disappeared into fog again, as if the world were already erasing what happened. Orders would come soon enough, new routes, new risks, same lies printed clean. But for that one dawn, in the half-light of a broken bridge, I understood what the war really wanted from us. Not courage. Not obedience. Just function. Keep the line alive. Whatever it costs. When the snow finally melted and the war shrank back into its maps, I went home. Ohio smelled of oil and spring again. The river thawed, the factories hummed, and no one mentioned the Ardennes. They called it a victory, as if the word could fill the gaps left by men who never returned. I reopened the garage on Lorraine Avenue, same as before. The windows still had grease ghosts where my old wrenches had leaned. I hung a new sign, hand-painted this time. It read simply, "Garvey's Repair, Engines Only." Above the workbench, I nailed the warped Studebaker badge. It had cooled into strange colors, bronze at the edges, blue in the center like a frozen flame. Customers asked about it sometimes. "You keep that up there for luck?" I'd shake my head. A mistake that worked. Life after war is a quieter kind of noise. The hiss of an air hose, the click of socket wrenches, the soft rhythm of radios playing ball games no one listens to. Some nights, when the shop was empty and the door rolled shut, I'd still hear the old truck idling out back, its engine note caught between gears. I'd look up expecting to see headlights through the window, but it was only passing trains, light trembling across the glass. Helen came back to me slower than I deserved. The war had made letters easy, conversation harder. We spoke in fragments at first, her garden, the neighbor's new fence, the weather. She never asked what I'd done, and I never told her. But once, when she saw me tracing the Studebaker badge with my thumb, she said softly, "That thing looks heavy." "It is," I said. "Then leave it where it hangs." So I did. Every few years, someone from the papers came around collecting stories. They'd heard about the miracle convoy, the truck that blocked a road and turned a battle. They wanted photographs, statements, hero angles. I told them they'd got the wrong man. They'd insist, "Records show," and I'd shake my head. Records show whatever someone wrote after the fact. I was just there. Eventually they stopped coming. The mechanics who apprenticed under me were born too late to know frostbite or tracer fire. I didn't teach them about war. I taught them about tolerance, how metal changes with temperature, how a bearing that fits in summer seizes in winter. But sometimes, when a stubborn engine refused to start, I'd hand them the wrench and say, "Forget the manual. Make it run." They'd grin, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. By the early 50s, America forgot the snow. Cars got bigger, roads cleaner, fuel cheaper. Every engine had more power than sense. But I kept the badge on the wall, blackened and bent, because I wanted to remember that perfection isn't what saves you, function is. Once, a young reporter tracked me down. He was maybe 20, sharp suit, shiny shoes that squeaked on the shop floor. "Mr. Garvey," he said, "they're saying your act of defiance turned the tide. Some even call it the fire that saved Europe." I wiped my hands on a rag. "Europe saved itself," I said. "I just kept a truck moving." He smiled like he thought I was being modest. "Then why keep that emblem?" "Because it reminds me what rules are worth." He wrote that down, word for word, like it was wisdom. It wasn't. It was memory. Years rolled by in oil and silence. The men I'd fueled scattered into photographs, then into graves. On winter mornings, when the first frost bit through the door, I'd start the stove early and let the warmth spread, the way fire once had in the woods. The younger mechanics would crowd near it, rubbing their hands, complaining about the cold. I never told them how kind that cold could be compared to the one I'd known. By the time the world built highways over the fields where we'd fought, my story had already thinned into rumor. That was fine. Machines are built to forget who drove them. But sometimes, when I tuned a carburetor just right and heard the engine catch clean, I'd close my eyes and for a second it was December again, the blizzard, the hiss, the impossible bridge, and I'd feel the wheel in my hands, steady and alive. Then I'd open them, and there'd be only the shop, the badge, and the smell of gasoline. And I'd think, forget the rules. Make it run. He broke the rules, and delivered the fire that saved Europe. His name faded from reports, buried under acronyms and promotions that belonged to others. But every engine that started in that winter carried the echo of one man's choice, to keep driving when the map ended. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I still hear it. The low hum of the Studebaker's 6 cylinders, steady and patient, pulling through snow that had swallowed the world. No medals, no speeches, just the rhythm of wheels refusing to stop. That's what remains of me. Not the fire, not the bridge, the motion. Because war ends the same way it begins, with one man deciding whether to move or wait. I moved.